Hey guys, how's it going? I want to quickly discuss a little bit about Down syndrome. I was reviewing some data and I was just so fascinated by the fact that the lifespan for Down syndrome babies has just improved remarkably. If you did a search on what can they expect to live, like back in the year 1900, then you would realize that it was just 9 years. That's it. The average lifespan of a Down syndrome baby back in the year 1900 was just 9 years. And now they can, expect to well live beyond 60 years of age. So that's incredible. And many of these kids, they are at a high risk to have congenital heart problems. Did you guys know that? That one extra chromosome. By the way, do you guys know what is Down syndrome? That is when you have one extra copy of chromosome number 21, okay? So that one extra chromosome, that ends up causing so much of problems. It causes heart problems. And then these kids are at a high risk to develop childhood cancers like blood cancer, leukemia. So in the heart as such, it's a big pump. And within the heart, you got multiple chambers. The atrium, you got the left atrium and the right atrium. They're kind of like a little bit of a, pumping ability. And then they pump blood into the ventricles, and the ventricles have bigger muscle and they can pump stronger. So you got the atrium and ventricle, right? And then within the atrium, you got the left atrium and then the right atrium, and then the ventricle same way, left ventricle and right ventricle. Normally, blood is supposed to go into the right atrium, from there to the right ventricle, and from there, blood is supposed to go into the lungs, get oxygenated, and from there, it's supposed to go into the left atrium, from there to the left ventricle, and in the left ventricle, it's got the biggest muscle mass, and it's supposed to pump blood to all the organs in the body. But in Down syndrome, what happens is they have a lot of congenital heart defects, which includes, holes between the left atrium and right atrium. Like normally there's supposed to be a septum, and that prevents blood from going from the left atrium to the right atrium. But if you have a hole in that septum, then what happens is blood goes from the left atrium to the right atrium. So it's a problem, okay? And then it's a same kind of a thing with the ventricles. If you got a hole in the ventricular septum, then blood goes from the left ventricle to the right ventricle instead of going out of the left ventricle to all the organs. So it ends up going to the right ventricle. So like these are all septal defects, either ventricular septal defect or atrial septal defect or atrioventricular septal defect. And then there are a few other congenital problems like a tetralogy of Fallot and then patent ductus arteriosus. So these heart problems put the child's life to such immense risk, and many of them end up dying so young. That's why in the recent past, what has happened is there's just wonderful, surgical techniques available to fix all these problems. So the kids are taken to surgery when they're just 4 or 5 months old, and then they fix the heart congenital problem. Incredible, isn't it? And similarly, childhood leukemias, like the blood cancers, they have such wonderful treatment options available. So they cure cancers. Amazing, incredible, isn't it? And also to diagnose the Down syndrome. Did you guys know this, by the way? Like Down syndrome was speculated to be a problem with maybe one extra chromosome back in the 1930s and 40s, but they didn't know which chromosome. And finally, it was figured out in 1959. Okay, and then to diagnose that when the child is still in the mom's womb, that there's a specific test called as amniocentesis, where they put a needle into the uterus and get a little bit of fluid analysis and then look at it, in the lab. And that became available only in 1966. So since 1966, Down syndrome could be diagnosed prenatally. And now we even have modern tools. There's something called a cell-free DNA analysis, and that analyzes the mother's blood in the first trimester. So when they get pregnant, if they're at a high risk to get a Down syndrome baby, like, do you guys know, by the way, what is the risk factor to get a Down syndrome baby? If the mother's age is like beyond 35 years. So if they're getting pregnant beyond 35, then that puts them at a high risk because maternal age is the biggest risk factor. So then if they're curious, then you can really do the blood test, cell-free DNA analysis. And that's done on mom's blood. I think they take about 10 to 20 cc of blood and analyze it. And that could be done in the first trimester. And then there's something called as chorionic villi sampling, which is, analyzing the placenta. So they put a needle, the chorionic villi sampling, and then the amniocentesis, these are invasive tests, while the cell-free DNA test in the first trimester, that's not invasive because it just takes mom's blood, that's it. But then in chorionic villi sampling, they put a needle into the uterus and take a little piece of the placenta and analyze it. So these are incredible advancements in medical field, and I am just so impressed, because when I was reviewing the data that Down syndrome baby's lifespan was 9 years in 1900 and now it's beyond 60 years, that makes me so happy. I hope you found this video interesting, guys. I'll talk to you later in my next post. Goodbye.